136. I talked to Mary Lou MacDonald.
Yesterday I raised with you the scandal of a wealthy Vulture fund buying up 46 of 54 homes at Belcamp Manor in North Dublin. These were homes that should have been available to workers and families to buy, to live in and to call home. Instead, they'll be rented out by the fund for more than €3,000 a month. It's scandalous. So clearly your measures to stop the funds have not measured up. It's not just Sinn Féin saying this. Department officials warned government last year that funds were still snapping up family homes from under the noses of ordinary home buyers. Yesterday, Taoiseach, you dismissed this issue. You sought to downplay what is a very serious problem in the midst of a housing crisis. So I want to raise it with you again today, Taoiseach. The 1,200 homes that have been bulk purchased since you introduced your regulations in 2021. Well, in these cases, it's clear that the fund simply absorbed the 10% stamp duty and then they carried on as normal. Nearly 700 of these homes were snapped up here in Dublin, but the Vultures also bought up homes in Cork, Carlow, Westmeath, Kildare, Wicklow, Limerick and beyond. So their claws extend far beyond the capital and the damage that they're doing is very real. Taoiseach, if the bulk purchasing weren't bad enough, we now also know that Vulture funds bought up 6,000 homes in 2022, 2,000 of which were houses. So in the year immediately following the introduction of your regulations, the year after you said government was clamping down on these funds, we see that more homes than ever were being bought by these Vulture funds. In fact, Taoiseach, it was 1 in 10 of all houses sold were bought by funds that year. So don't play this down, Taoiseach. Don't pretend it's not happening. This is a big problem. It cuts to the unfairness at the heart of the housing crisis, and you can't blame young people in particular feeling that the table is tilted against them. The activity by Vulture funds locks people out of home ownership, forces them into the private rental market, where the same funds then charge extortionate levels of rent. And then the rent money comes rolling in, and government ensures that funds don't pay a single red cent of tax on this rental income. So where is the urgency in government to sort this out? Well, Minister O'Brien says government will review its measures. But as things stand, another Belcamp Manor could happen today if government doesn't act and act quickly. Tá sé thar am inisig an rialtas seasamh suas I gcóir gnó ceannaitheoirí tithe. Má tá siad dó riamh faoi stopa cur leis na crackhistoí atá ceannach tithe le teaghlaí, tacóidh siad le plan Sinn Féin anocht. Taoiseach, yesterday you told me, and I believe you, that you don't like to see investment funds buying up family homes en masse, but actions speak louder than words. We have a motion before the Dáil tonight that would stop funds buying up family homes, and every TD can vote tonight to clip the wings of the Vulture funds, and your government has a choice to make. You can continue to stand with the Vulture funds, or you can finally step in decisively on the side of ordinary home buyers and say that this stops now. Which choice will you make, Taoiseach?
Thanks, Deputy. As I said yesterday, the government doesn't want to see investment funds buying up family homes that could be bought by individual families for their own use. And that's why we changed the law in 2021 for new planning permissions. This particular development got planning permission in 2019 and therefore didn't fall under the law, which we changed in 2021. And that's why this has arisen in this particular case. We've also put a super tax, a stamp duty of 10% on the bulk purchase of homes. I hear what Sinn Féin is saying, that you want that to increase to 17%. I think the Social Democrats have proposed 100%. Other parties in the opposition have proposed an outright ban. So even the opposition is not united on the solution to this issue. So what we know is that when it comes to planning permissions granted after 2021, we've already resolved the issue. What does arise is developments that got planning permission before 2021. And if we're going to make any change to stamp duty, we need to examine that carefully. First of all, to make sure that any increase would be effective, and secondly, to make sure that it wouldn't have any unintended consequences. And the fact that the opposition is divided 3 to 4 ways on this actually shows that this is not a simple matter. And while they might vote with you tonight, they don't actually agree with you. And that, I think, tells a story in itself. In terms of the numbers that you mentioned, Deputy, if you can supply me with those numbers, I'd like to check them out. It is a higher number than I would have expected, quite frankly, but it might be the case that some of those bulk purchases were for social housing, and that's quite different. It might be that some of those bulk purchases were not family homes, and we have made a distinction between apartments and houses and family homes. So I would like to interrogate those figures if you'd be good enough to supply them to me. One thing you said is that not a red cent of tax is paid. That is misinformation, Deputy. That's not correct. Tax is paid, obviously, first of all, in the form of the stamp duty when the properties are bulk purchased, and then when the dividend is paid out to the shareholders, capital acquisition tax applies there. So it's not the case. That was misinformation, Deputy.
Okay, so for clarity, I was referring to the rental income, not a red cent there. And bear in mind the level at which the level at which these rents stand. Our motion this evening makes a call for a rate of at least 17%, and we're simply reiterating what we told you at the time, that anything less than 17% would fail. It would fail to be an adequate disincentive to clip the wings of the Vulture Fund. So we're repeating this. I see no reason why you wouldn't support the motion. If you are, as you say, concerned to stop this practice. And the figures that I've quoted to you, Taoiseach, I don't have to provide them to you. The CSO have published them. You're not familiar with these figures. I put it to you that you should be. And when you study them, you will find and affirm that 1 in 10 houses sold, homes sold in the year 2021 were snapped up by these funds. Some in bulk purchases, others fell beneath the threshold of that. This is a significant issue. It's not a marginal issue. You got it wrong in 2021. Don't get it wrong again, Taoiseach.
Yeah, I would genuinely like to see those figures and would genuinely like a few hours just to interrogate them. 2021 was the year in which the law was changed. And it was changed, if I remember correctly, during the course of the year. So what will be particularly interesting will be to see the numbers for 22 and 23, because that's when they would have affected. But like I say, I'd like to see them and interrogate them. But just to come back to what you said, Deputy, in relation to tax, companies and people are taxed differently. If you're an individual, if you're a person, if you're a landlord, you pay income tax. Companies don't pay income tax, they never have. Companies pay corporation profit tax, and when they issue a dividend to their shareholders, those shareholders pay capital acquisitions tax. That's how they're taxed. To say that they don't pay a red cent of tax is misinformation, Deputy.
No, you're completely wrong.
Thank you. Tá méid bugger right. Gee, Parchi an Lucht Ibra, Parchi an Lucht Ibra, Yachty Ivana Batchik Moshetel.
Good last count, Corla. Taoiseach, everyone, regardless of where in Ireland they live or how much is in their pocket, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect when they are sick. And everyone deserves to have timely access to the medical treatments they need. And I know you appreciate that. But Taoiseach, your government's policies are hurting people in hospitals, not helping them. And I'm talking about the current HSE recruitment freeze, about overcrowding, about long waiting lists, a trolley crisis, a retention crisis, and a lack of community supports for those discharged from hospital. And the list goes on. Every week we all hear healthcare horror stories, Taoiseach. We hear from patients detailing awful experiences in hospital emergency departments, from working people worrying about healthcare access for older parents or younger children, from people with complex medical needs who are afraid of getting sick if they go into hospital, and from frontline medical workers who are exhausted and worn out, looking to greener pastures in Australia, New Zealand or elsewhere. Taoiseach, yesterday, my Labour Party colleague in Limerick, Councillor Conor Sheehan, shared the recent awful experience of his own grandfather, Jerry Mullins, at University Hospital, Limerick. And last Thursday, on the advice of Mr Mullins' GP, his family had brought him to UHL Emergency Department to seek treatment for an ulcer on his leg. What followed his arrival offers a desperate insight into the reality of emergency healthcare in Ireland. Upon discovering that his ulcer had become septic, the overworked staff at UHL began to treat Councillor Sheehan's grandfather, who had at that point become extremely unwell. Yet over the course of the emergency treatment, while very unwell, he had to spend 4 days on a trolley. And Conor Sheehan and his family witnessed during that time frenetic scenes at UHL, multiple vulnerable patients, exhausted, agitated, having to wait on trolleys, chronically overworked and overburdened nursing and medical staff. Taoiseach, the staff at UHL deserve so much more than to have to work under those conditions. Patients at UHL and their families deserve better too. And we know this isn't an isolated case. I want to express my sympathies again to the family of 16-year-old Aoife Johnston, who died so tragically from meningitis in UHL in December 2022. Taoiseach, conditions in our hospital have major ramifications for health outcomes. The INMO tell us it takes just 6 hours on a trolley for a person's long-term health outcomes to decline. There is no more give in the system, Taoiseach, and it does fall to you, to Minister Donnelly and your colleagues, to address the crisis, with the INMO telling us that 1,552 people have been on trolleys in UHL alone since the beginning of January, and across the country, so many medical professionals working through yet another winter in impossible and often dangerous environments. All that is achieved by miserly recruitment freezes is to put more pressure on services. So Taoiseach, will you end the damaging recruitment freeze, address the trolley crisis and ensure that our hospitals are safe? And what will you do this winter to address the healthcare needs of the people of Limerick with the ongoing crisis in UHL?
I just want to thank Deputy Batchick for raising this important issue, and at the outset I want to acknowledge that there are far too many people in Ireland waiting far too long to see a specialist or to get the operation they need, and that our emergency departments are very busy at the moment, and that's putting staff under a lot of pressure. And I'm really sorry that Mr Sheehan's grandfather had the experience that he did, and that's not acceptable. That should be the case. I think it is important, though, to put on the record of the House that there has been phenomenal additional investment in our health services under this government. Since 2020, only 3 years ago, or 4 years ago now, we have recruited 20,000 more staff, 1,000 more consultants. We're now in the top 5 in terms of practicing nurses per head of population in the OECD. And that investment is making a difference, Deputy. We see significant overcrowding in our hospitals this January, but not as bad as we've seen in previous years. And that is, at least in part, down to the extra beds, extra doctors, extra nurses and extra staff. And we saw last year that waiting times for patients fell. So for 2 years in a row, we've seen waiting lists fall. Peaked after the pandemic, has been falling since then. And I believe this year will be the 3rd year in a row in which we'll see the number of people waiting more than 10 to 12 weeks fall. And that's a not insignificant achievement. Just look north of the border, what's happening there. Look across the water to the UK. Look at most developed countries in the world, and they're seeing waiting lists rising. Yet for Ireland, fallen for 2 years in a row, will fall this year for the 3rd year in a row. And that is down to the phenomenal work of the people who work in our health service, and also the massive additional government investment that has been put into our health service over the course of the last 3 or 4 years. In relation to the recruitment embargo, it's important to say what that actually means. What that actually means is that the HSE can hire an additional 2,000 staff this year. So we've had a big increase in the number of staff in the HSE, and they can hire an extra 2,000 staff this year. What we can't have is what we've seen in the past, is the HSE getting approval for one group of staff, not hiring them, and hiring a different group of staff instead. So we have to put some decent control on this. But the recruitment embargo, as it's described, actually means they can hire 2,000 extra people this year. And of course it doesn't apply, for example, to graduate nurses and midwives, doesn't apply to consultants or GPs.
Taoiseach, first, thank you for your words for Conor Sheehan. And I do absolutely agree with you about the immense hard work and commitment of our medical staff across the country. But you've given me a standard response on the recruitment freeze. And Taoiseach, the reality is that lifting the freeze for certain contracts or certain grades will fix nothing. It will not entice our healthcare professionals back from Australia or Dubai or Britain. And it's an indictment of your healthcare policies that even now, even with the improvements you list, that Conor Sheehan's family story is not unique, that it's replicated across the country. It's an indictment that we've come to accept that long waiting lists in hospitals are somehow normal. Taoiseach, people go to hospital to get better, and hospitals should not be a place where conditions will worsen while people languish awaiting a bed. Our healthcare staff should be treated with respect, and we should see the full recruitment freeze lifted across all grades, as our healthcare staff are seeking. Taoiseach, we need to fix things, and you haven't addressed in particular the issue around UHL, because that is a particular stain on our healthcare system. And I'm asking you again, what will you do for the people of Limerick this winter? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Deputy. Just again for the information of the House, we hired an extra, and I mean extra, 1,019 medical and dental staff last year. We hired an extra 2,100 extra nurses and midwives last year, and an extra 929 health and social care professionals. So yes, there are lots of people coming and going. We have an international labour market when it comes to healthcare, but we're doing pretty well in terms of recruiting extra staff for our health service, and the HSE will be allowed to hire an extra 2,000 staff overall over the course of this year. People describe that as a recruitment freeze. Having laid out the facts, people can decide for themselves whether that's an appropriate term to use or not. In relation to Limerick, Deputy, 150 extra beds added in the Midwest under this government, most of them in Limerick. Another 96 under construction will come into commission in the new year. Also a new private hospital under construction, which will help in terms of the bigger picture, and investment in Ennis and Nina, St John's and community services to take the pressure off the main hospital in Dooradoyle. But as we know from Waterford, as we know from Conley Hospital, my constituency, which is a great hospital, as we know from Vincent's, as we know from all over the country, it's not just about additional resources, staff and beds. You need good clinical leadership and sharp management too.
Thank you. Táimid bugar Ryan Ishkaji on trio kist of people before profit solidarity.
Thanks,
Kenny.
Thanks, Taoiseach, tomorrow the Citizens' Assembly on Drug Use will publish its final report. It's an historic day tomorrow in relation to this issue. They have made 30 recommendations calling for reform of our present drug policy. The Assembly stated that drug use and misuse was a public health issue rather than a criminal one. And overall, the sentiment is that the status quo of criminalisation does not work. And I just repeat that, does not work. This policy of criminalisation has been the state's default position for the past 6 decades. That has stigmatised, marginalised and criminalised not only individuals but communities across the country. But now we have a better understanding of addiction and the reasons why people fall into addictions. It's a very complex issue, but we have a more holistic kind of approach to why that happens. And there's factors such as poverty, disadvantage and deep trauma that goes on in people's lives that people turn to sometimes drugs, sometimes alcohol, and these are huge social determinants in relation to this issue. And I believe, Taoiseach, public opinion now has shifted, particularly in the last number of years in relation to changing course in relation to the 6 decades as I stipulated. And this has not only been reflected in the Citizens' Assembly, but also the Justice Committee had a very, very good report 14 months ago in relation to having a different course of action in relation to drug use and funding in relation to communities and changing that course of action. And Taoiseach, I believe there's a generational chance to change that course in relation to them 6 decades. Ireland has one of the highest overdose drug-related deaths in Europe. In the north of Ireland, there is an explosion of people dying in relation to drug-related deaths. So something needs to happen. Other countries have done it differently in relation to safe consumption rooms and so forth. And I think that needs to be done as very quick as possible. And, the chairperson of the Citizens' Assembly stated there is no time to waste. There is no time to waste, Taoiseach. If it saves one life, literally one person, if that can save one life, then it's worth changing course in relation to criminalising people. So my question is, will the government obviously, take the recommendations, and not only kind of take the recommendations in relation to policy, but the key thing in relation to that report was legislative change. We have the Misuse of Drugs Act since the 1970s, criminalising people, sending people to the criminal justice system, sending people to the courts, jailing people. It doesn't work, Taoiseach. Show me where it does work. Other jurisdictions have showed that, there's a different, we can change a course and we can actually save lives and take people out of the criminal justice system.
Thanks, Deputy, and once again, thanks for your interest and knowledge on this matter. I think it goes without saying that the greatest drug of use and misuse in this state is alcohol, and it's legal. It's associated with public order offences, child abuse, violence against women. It is associated with acute disease, chronic disease, makes mental health worse, associated with suicide, public order offences, major road traffic accidents, and yet we would never consider criminalising alcohol in Ireland because we know it wouldn't work. People wouldn't obey the law, and alcohol would be driven into the hands of a criminal industry, and people would be killed by impure alcohol, as was the case during prohibition periods in Ireland. And I think that's something we all need to be honest about. And in my view, drug use and misuse by individuals should be seen primarily as a public health issue and not a criminal justice matter. But that is very different from drug dealing, for example, and the production of illegal medicines and drugs. And I certainly think that shaming people and blaming people and criminalising people isn't an effective policy and has largely been rejected by the public, particularly younger people. And if it was the case that that approach and the war on drugs and just say no was a successful policy, it would have been successful 40 years ago. And it hasn't worked. And I think we all need to admit that. And certainly that's what the Citizens' Assembly admitted in its report. In terms of where we go from here, I'm going to have a chance to meet with Paul Reid tomorrow. He's going to present the report to me, keen to hear his reflections, not just what's written down in the report. And then he's going to meet with Minister Naughton as well, whose responsibility for this area, and will publish the report formally. And then I think it's important that we have an opportunity for the Oireachtas to consider it. That's the usual process for a Citizens' Assembly, and we'll set out the details as to how that can be done, most likely tomorrow after the meeting with Paul Reid.
Dr. Kenny.
So I think one of the main elements of the report was not kind of having lip service to our approach, but obviously changing the legislation. And you said, criminalising people for small possessions of drugs, no matter what them drugs are, simply is a waste of resources for the state. And the proliferation of drugs, whether people use drugs or not, that's irrelevant. But the proliferation of drugs and availability of drugs is widespread. It's impossible, and people that are in the law enforcement kind of area have said that law enforcement alone simply cannot, curtail the availability of drugs and the reason why people take drugs. A lot of people take drugs and never have a problem, but there are people that will fall into addictions. Now, next week, Taoiseach, which is a test of your government, People for Profit is bringing forward a bill, very simple bill in relation to somebody that has a simple, in simple possession of cannabis on their possession. We're asking you to have a look at the bill. It's a very short bill, and to endorse it and let it go to committee stage, because this is the test. I think the days of lip service are over, Taoiseach, and the days of saving lives is on.
Thanks, Deputy. I used to be a sceptic of citizens' assemblies, and over the past 5 or 10 years I've become a fan of them. I think they can be really effective. We don't always accept the recommendations, nor do we have to, but we always consider them. And I think when you put in front of 100 citizens all of the evidence, all of the experts and all of the advice, sometimes they come up with very good recommendations. And like I say, we don't always accept them. We often do. But we're the legislature. We're the ones who actually make the decisions in the end, and that should never change. and we'll have to give careful consideration to any kind of legal change. And that's our job. And that's going to take a bit of work and a bit of advice. Certainly what the Gardaí say to me, and I've asked the Gardaí about this on a number of occasions, they would say to me that they would rarely prosecute people for possession. And where they do prosecute people for possession, it's because they suspect they've been doing more than possession, that they have been dealing or promoting or selling, but that's the charge they can get them on. So there's just complexities like that we need to kind of figure out. And like I say, we'll set out tomorrow how we best think that this report can be taken forward.
Taoiseach, last November I asked you as Taoiseach, as leader of our country, to lead what I hoped would be an open, honest, factual and respectful debate on immigration. So far this hasn't happened, and in my view, until we treat our citizens as adults and trust them with all the facts, the nice stuff we want them to hear and the hard facts, the tough stuff that's difficult. Until that happens, Taoiseach, people will and have got some of their information elsewhere, and that's not always good. Today I just want to raise one issue with you. The national conversation, and it's a difficult one, but it's the national conversation around single men who are seeking asylum and the specific situation whereby some communities have said they will welcome and integrate families but not groups of single men. Now, the knee-jerk reaction is, this is unacceptable, it's racist, these are far-right tropes. But I'm asking for a little bit of reflection and to cast your mind back just 2 years ago, when thousands of visceral statements from so many Irish women followed the horrific murder of Aisling Murphy. And I still remember some of the comments from Minister Anne Rabbitte, who said, in this House, she said, not all men, but all women grow up knowing they are not safe. Not all men, but all women know the feeling that creeps up your back when you hear steps behind you and you have to check. And she told us, by simply existing, women's lives are at risk from men they know and men they do not know. So, Taoiseach, we believed women 2 years ago when they made these statements about Irishmen. So I'm asking you, why do we not at least entertain those statements from women now when they say that the idea of 30, 40, 50, whatever, single asylum seekers arriving in their town or village, living 3 or 4 to a room, no family connections, nothing to do most of the time, why do we not take on those concerns as genuine? Now, let me be crystal clear. There is no evidence, zero evidence, none, that they pose any greater threat than 80 Irishmen. But many women have said to me, and I believe them, that they would say the same thing about 80 Irishmen in the same circumstances. Taoiseach, I'm not saying there's no racism involved here. We all need to question ourselves, but this heightened concern is real. So I'm just asking you, to listen, to engage and to believe. I'm asking you to have the debate, warts and all. And I'm asking you to manage this in a reasonable and rational way so that we can honour our commitments and bring communities with us.
Thanks, thanks, Deputy. I have to say, I have to be honest with you, I am quite disappointed in the question you asked, and I can see the faces of many people around this House who I think agree with me. I think the killing and the death of Aisling Murphy was one of those events that really touched the nation. I remember it so well, and I remember the outpouring of grief for that young woman who was killed in the way she was. And I remember the anniversary only a few weeks ago. And I really think to connect that to a debate about international protection and migration is really wrong. Really wrong. The evil person who killed poor Aisling Murphy was an EU citizen, had been in the country for the best part of 10 years, working and paying taxes. That's how he acquired his rights to social welfare and other things. And sadly, he turned on that girl for whatever reason he did and killed her. But to connect that to international protection, and refugees coming to this country, whether they're genuine or not. It's really wrong, Deputy. Like, really, Deputy, don't bring our country down into that spiral. Please don't.
Taoiseach, you're disappointed. I'm disappointed that you didn't engage. I'm disappointed that you didn't respond to the real concerns that I hear from people. And this is dividing people. I mean, I won't be lectured. Taoiseach, the last public meeting that I attended, there were vile slurs spoken against migrants, and I was the only public rep who called them out. And let me tell you, Taoiseach, there were members of your own party at that meeting who shut their mouths, but I didn't, because I won't listen to it. But equally, when members of my community express what they feel are genuine concerns, I won't close my ears. And I expect this House, as the House that represents the people of Ireland, to take this on board. We can't just have the one narrative. We can't just have only one perspective.
Thank you.
I never said, Taoiseach,
Thank you, Deputy.
and I said 3 times, migrants, there's no evidence,
Deputy. We're way over time.
none,
We're way
to
over
suggest,
time.
but the Taoiseach
We're
is...
over time.
Yes, but he didn't take his time. He didn't feel it was important enough
Deputy,
to respond to
Deputy,
me
thank
last
you very much.
Concordia.
Thomas Harron,
And I
Taoiseach
feel
to respond.
that by his
Deputy,
response...
thank you. We're way over time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sadly, people from all sorts of backgrounds and all sorts of genders and all sorts of races and religions and colours commit crimes. But to conflate crime and violence against women in particular with migration, I think, is profoundly wrong and profoundly dangerous. Yes, you did, Deputy. Yes, you did, Deputy. Yes, you did, Deputy. And in relation to...
Just the Taoiseach. Deputy, please. Let the Taoiseach... Let the Taoiseach respond. Deputy, let the Taoiseach respond.
And Deputy, in relation to your remarks about me, I have engaged in this debate. I probably engage in it every other day in my constituency, in this House and in this media. Only a few weeks ago, I wrote a detailed article published in the Sunday Independent setting out what our immigration policy is and was, what the facts were and what they were not. And I'll keep doing that. But I need a bit of help. I need a bit of help from people in this House who oh, you're not. Sorry, Karen. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Taoiseach. That concludes sin dearg le ceistan in a January agus tá muid réile bogarráid go dtí an chéad